I think the most that people have heard about the story of Ted Kaczynski is just that he was called the Unabomber. He tried to blow up some stuff, and he was just kind of a crazy guy. But a lot of people don't know his whole story and how he got to the point of being crazy enough to want to blow something up. And so that's what we're doing this week. We are taking a deeper dive into the story of a guy who, you know what? Maybe we all had this coming to us because, as you'll see, maybe the government had something to do with it. And that's not me being paranoid. It's called foreshadowing. It's Our Weird World.
Our Weird World.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and a couple of production notes. One, got the cold open back. Felt finally creative enough to riff on one of those. Also, I think I've adjusted the volumes again. My levels look a lot healthier here as I'm recording. I don't know. It's just weird. I felt like the intro, like the music beds to start the year were always louder than my actual voice. Maybe you didn't know, maybe you didn't care, but it bothered me. And now I think I finally figured it out. So, anyway, it's not important. This week, looking at the story of Ted Kaczynski. And so I've already kind of set it up in the open. So let's jump into story time. Theodore John Kaczynski was born on May 22nd, 1942 in Chicago to a blue-collar Polish family, which is mostly what Chicago is. Although Ted started out as a happy child, he caught a very severe case of the hives that forced him into hospitalized isolation. Sure. I was going to say hospitalization and isolation at the same time, and so I got isolation. Anyway, he was forced into hospitalized isolation, and that really changed his overall demeanor. I don't know if the hives themselves actually screwed up his brain chemistry, but at least when he went into isolation at the hospital, it really scarred him. It really messed him up. And so, everybody noticed a change in him after that. But still, despite that, he performed really well in school. They even allowed him to just completely skip the 6th grade after his IQ tested at 167. All right. That's a really high number. All right. I don't know what my IQ score is, but above a 130 is considered gifted. Very gifted. So, and only 2.1% of the population even gets above that. I don't know what my IQ is. Probably if I'm being honest, I'd probably put it in the low 100s, probably in the above average or gifted range. I feel like I'm a pretty smart guy, but I don't know that I'm very gifted. Whatever. But Ted, he's super gifted. All right. He's very intelligent. He played trombone in the high school marching band. He was a member of several extracurricular clubs, which is a surefire way to just get mercilessly mocked and abused by other kids in school. And to make that even worse, his biggest passion in school was math. He continued just to excel in school, and he even was able to skip 11th grade after already being able to skip 6th grade. And then after a session of summer school, he actually graduated high school at age 15. The next year, he then went on to Harvard on a full scholarship. But during his sophomore year, so he's 17 at this point, Ted participated in what was described as a, quote, purposely brutalizing psychological experiment that was led by Harvard psychologist Henry Murray. Test subjects were actually just told that they would simply be debating personal philosophies with other students and then write an essay about their experience. But what they were not told was that those essays would then be turned over to an anonymous attorney who would then confront the authors about their work and then take great pride in belittling, berating, and humiliating them for everything that they wrote. And while this confrontation was happening, Murray, who was leading the study, placed electrodes on the subjects' heads and measured their reactions and their brain waves and how their brains responded to all this. The sessions then were also taped and played back for the subjects on several occasions, so they had to relive their own humiliation. And Ted spent 200 hours in this study, and many people believe that this was actually part of Project MK Ultra. And if you don't remember, Project MK Ultra, we covered that on episode 73. It was real government projects. And basically, MK Ultra was basically this gigantic study. It was an umbrella term for several other studies, over 150 other government sub-projects that the government sponsored because they were super paranoid about the rise of communism. And they also believed that like a spy had already infiltrated the CIA and gotten into the highest levels of the organization. But Project MK Ultra overall basically funded studies to research just a variety of mind-altering substances that either like changed someone's brain chemistry or inhibited a person's mind and or body, and included, things like illogical thinking, impulsiveness, faster aging, amnesia, paralysis, blisters, poor vision, temporary or permanent brain damage, all kinds of stuff. The big part of Project MK Ultra that most people associate with it is the government's use of LSD. And so if you want to hear all about that, go back, listen to episode 79. All right. That's not this. Anyway, it's a side note for this Ted Kaczynski episode. Anyway, following his graduation from Harvard, he ended up graduating. Everything's going great. Ted went to the University of Michigan and got his master's and doctoral degrees in math. And in 1967, he became the youngest assistant professor in history at the University of California, Berkeley, at age 25. Like, and here's the thing, like, I don't know how much you know about like the college landscape, but Cal Berkeley is like one of the more prestigious colleges. All right. So like, if you think about like, I know here we've got UNC and Duke. And so like California, Berkeley and Stanford would be basically the equivalent of that. Like UNC here, regardless of how you feel about their sports, UNC, one of the most prestigious public universities. Cal, I don't know if Cal Berkeley is public or private, but like them and Stanford, it's kind of the same sort of relationship. However, a 25-year-old professor, not going to be super popular among anybody. Like, because he's still young enough to relate to all of the college kids, but not old enough to relate to all of the professors who have spent decades getting to that position. And so, like, even though he's young enough to still kind of potentially relate to these college kids, like, he's a smug, super nerdy dude. So, like, he can't relate to them. So nobody likes him. So he ended up resigning after 2 years, and then he ended up moving back home to live with his parents in Chicago before then moving to a remote cabin that he had built near Lincoln, Montana. And that seems like a crazy jump to make. Like, clearly he's had some sort of mental breakdown. And basically, because of that Harvard study and the poor experience that he had teaching at Berkeley, Ted ended up desiring this life of solitude where he could just live off the land, live off the grid without any electricity or running water, and just work enough to earn enough money to just buy the essential supplies that he needed. He ended up teaching himself survival skills, farming, and primitive fire starting techniques. And because like he already lived in an area of Montana where there were other people who had the same desires and lived the same kind of lifestyle, nobody thought it was weird, like, and this is the thing, like Montana, Idaho, at least northern Idaho, like where it gets like really rugged and remote. This is where you have all of these paranoid people who are like going off the grid because government's gonna come take my guns. They're not. And government, I don't need the government tracking me and following my actions and knowing what porn I'm searching for on the line. And I don't know why that's the thing that they're doing. But yeah, like that's where all of these people go. If you can't get all the way to Alaska, where like a lot of them are, you go to like Montana, northern Idaho, places like that. and you just go off the grid. You live off the land, you know, real self-sufficient. And these people, especially like near Lincoln, Montana, that's what they were. And so seeing another guy come in, like, sure, it's probably weird that it's like this nerdy little math dork, but he's one of us. So, hey, whatever, let's welcome him into the community. Unfortunately, though, Ted could not find the peace that he wanted, mainly because real estate developers began cutting roads and building homes a little too close to his cabin. Because, you know, the other people, like, you know, normal people were like, man, Montana's really nice, but we also want to have normal things like electricity and air conditioning. And so they moved up there. And so when, you know, developed life kind of got too close for comfort, he decided that he could no longer live this self-sufficient life, and he decided that he was going to get back at the man for infringing upon his solitude. Because if we know anything about how life works, it's just this one overarching organization. It's the Lizard Illuminati controlling all of the economy and all the stock markets and controlling where people live and all this. It's not just like it's not just the results of other local governments and you know, personal preference and cultural change moving around and finding new places to live and all that kind of stuff. No. You know, like modern advancements, like the reason that no one lived in Montana for a really long time is because it's really hard to get there. You know, it's really hard to set up the infrastructure needed to sustain a comfortable life. But as time has progressed and technology's gotten better, it's a lot easier to live in those rugged places, and people want to live there because it's really pretty. And now that you have the technology to build water mains and you can get power out there, it's a lot more attractive for people to move out there. It has nothing to do with like this giant government conspiracy for anything, especially in Ted's case. But on May 25th, 1978, Ted mailed his first bomb to math professor Buckley Crist at Berkeley, with Crist's address also listed as the return address. So basically, Kaczynski made it look like Crist had mailed this thing to himself. Crist, actually, when he got it, he became immediately suspicious because he knew he hadn't mailed anything. And so instead, he got campus police officer Terry Marker to open the package, which subsequently exploded and mangled this poor guy's hand. So Ted, like, I realize, like, we've really progressed here. So, like, Ted has gone off the rails for sure. And he thinks that he, in his mind, in his brilliant mind, which is what's so crazy about this story, he's incredibly smart. But he has now reasoned that in order to get back at the man, he's going to just start mailing bombs to all of these people for some reason. Like, I'm not entirely sure what Buckley Crist had to do. I mean, you know, he was a professor at Berkeley. He's another math professor. Maybe Buckley was just one of those people who was mean to him. And so now Ted's just going to get back at all of these people who were mean to him, or like big entities to, you know, you're going to show them. I don't know what he's going to show them, but he's going to show them. The big one, though, the big attack came the following year in 1979 when Ted placed a bomb in the cargo hold of American Airlines Flight 444, which was traveling from Chicago to Washington, D.C. However, like, he wasn't like super good at making bombs yet. And so the timer failed, which only caused the bomb to release a lot of smoke. And that still forced the plane to make an emergency landing. But immediately, though, the police were able to connect this bomb with the one at Berkeley, and they named their suspect the Unabomber, which somehow that was short. That was like the shortened version of the University and Airline Bomber. Sure. Like, I don't think a lot of people know that that's what Unabomber stands for. I think they just assume that, like, that's just the cool nickname that he got. No, it actually stands for University and Airline Bomber. I don't know how you can short university and airline into UNA, but whatever. And the other thing is that Ted, on these bombs, he left all sorts of like false clues and initials on his bombs purposely to, you know, create like a false trail of information. And it worked because the FBI had a really hard time figuring out who was behind these two attacks. And over the next 16 years, that's what's crazy. Like, I think we all just remember the main failed airplane bombing as like the thing that he was most remembered for. But dude put bombs, like was just putting bombs in everything for 16 years. And like the thing is like they weren't great bombs. Like Ted, great at math, bad at bomb making, bad at science. All right. Which is weird because math and science typically go together. If you're good at math, you should be pretty good at science and understanding like chemical ratios and what needs to go together to make something go boom. But Ted couldn't do it. And so like most of Ted's bombs that he created and built and mailed out over the next 16 years only really just caused minor injuries. But a couple of them did work. One guy, John Hauser, who was a graduate student at Berkeley, lost 4 fingers and vision in one of his eyes after one of Ted's bombs detonated in front of him. Only one death actually ended up coming from Ted's bombs, and that was Hugh Scruton, who was a Sacramento computer store owner who was killed when he was just blasted basically at point blank range with nails and splinters after one of Ted's bombs exploded in the parking lot of his store. So in 1995, Ted finally got to a point where he decided that random cryptic bombs to people really weren't getting his message across. So he decided to mail letters to several media outlets around the country demanding that they publish his 35,000-word manifesto titled Industrial Society and Its Future. And if they did that, if they complied, he would, quote, desist from terrorism. So a lot of people, it's weird. It's just like, oh, so all of these random bombs, most of which that don't work, but did, really hurt a couple people, killed a guy. This guy is now demanding that we publish his terrible essay, short book on whatever this is, whatever random weird thoughts this guy had. This was the 90s, you guys. Like, this is what's crazy. Like, I grew up as a kid in the 90s. I often have very fond memories of the 90s, but it's very easy to see like the 90s were pretty messed up. All right. You had like the first World Trade Center attack. You had Waco siege. You had Ruby Ridge, which was a similar siege with less death, but still death. You had Ted Kaczynski mailing out manifestos and bombing people. Like, it was a weird decade. It was a real passive aggressive decade, but a very weird and volatile decade regardless. And it's so easy to forget that. A lot of people, government agents, the publishing, the news outlets, everything, they didn't really like the idea of just bowing to this terrorist. But FBI Director Louis Freeh and Attorney General Janet Reno both recommended that media outlets just publish it on the grounds of public safety. Just why not? What's it going to hurt? Bob Guccione from Penthouse, the porn magazine, he offered to publish it because why not? And here's the thing, like Penthouse comes out and they're like, hey, we'll publish this, throw some boobs on there, everybody be happy. Because that's probably how a guy named Bob Guccione talks. But Ted, when he heard about this news, he got real angry and he opposed that because Penthouse in his mind was, quote, less respectable than other publications like, I don't know, the New York Times, the Washington Post. And he's probably got a point. However, Ted's manifesto was finally published in both the New York Times and the Washington Post on September 19th, 1995. Basically, it just like the whole thing denounced technology and the Industrial Revolution and kind of labeled both of them as like this downfall of human society. He argued that like because of advancements in technology, people were spending more time watching television and following sports and would soon just become these genetically engineered robots for social systems rather than continuing to just live freely as people had done for like the past thousands of years up until this point. And, look, despite being authored by someone who had become seriously mentally unhinged, like the manifesto was widely regarded as like being pretty profound and actually kind of logical. Like, it makes sense. Like the more, and you can see how that's become a thing, especially as times progress. Like we now have phones. We're glued to our phones all the time. We're just these little bots scrolling around. We're getting VR headsets. And then, we're just going to get to a point where we're just sitting around all day and we've got this headset on, this fully immersive headset, and we're just in this metaverse, because that's a thing as well. And we're living in this digital altered reality. And that was Ted's point. It's like, that's where we're all going. And that's not how human society should progress. Like, we should still be living off the land, pumping our own water, pooping in an outhouse, all that kind of stuff. And disagree. Agree to disagree on that, I think that at least kind of how things are right now, you're going to have fewer and fewer people who truly understand how to be self-sufficient. I think more and more people are going to be very reliant on technology, and the risk for that is if, technology fails, if like the power grid fails or whatever, a lot of people are going to be screwed. It's going to devolve into chaos pretty quickly. But also, I think technology has far greater benefits than living in a wooden shack with no heat or air conditioning and just, surviving on the elements. I prefer this life. I do. So where are we at? The FBI, one of the other reasons why the FBI kind of wanted this manifesto to get published is because they would hope that people would start calling in with tips. And that's exactly what happened. They started receiving as many as 1,000 phone calls every day after the manifesto was published. And there were 150 people on this task force working full-time to investigate thousands of leads that were coming in. And meanwhile, one of the people who had read this manifesto, had not called it in yet, but was getting really suspicious, was Ted's brother, David. And David, rather than going to the FBI first, he hired a private investigator to look into his brother. And after David had compiled his own evidence, he then started working with the FBI to come to a general consensus that Ted was, in fact, the Unabomber. And so Ted ended up getting arrested at his cabin on April 3rd, 1996. Officers ended up finding 40,000 handwritten pages and one live bomb ready to be sent out. Ted went very cooperated. He went easily, and he pleaded guilty to all of the charges brought against him to avoid the death penalty. He was given 8 life sentences for the bomb attacks, and he was sent to ADX Florence, which is the supermax prison in Colorado, where we send the worst of the worst. Where, funnily enough, he actually became friends with Ramzi Youssef and Timothy McVeigh, who were the perpetrators of the 93 World Trade Center bombing and the Oklahoma City bombing. And so that is the story of Ted Kaczynski. So there you go. I mean, was that the most riveting, exciting story? No, but I think it's good to get context and really understand these figures from our history and our culture. It's like, he got the nickname Unabomber for one incident, and then for another 16 years, he's just mailing bombs and improvised explosives to people, and most of them don't even work, which I think that was also why there wasn't a huge sense of urgency to find this guy, but also he was leaving all of these false clues and really throwing the FBI and other investigators off the trail. And so he was really good in that regard, but just real bad at being a terrorist, despite how smart he was. And he finally got to this point where, just led to all of this. So yeah, let's see what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Number 1, Ted Kaczynski had an IQ of 167 and he was allowed to skip 2 grades. He got to go to Harvard as a 15, 16-year-old. And look, it's also his story overall is just proof that even if you're smart, really, really, really smart, doesn't necessarily mean that you are set up for success in life. Because, and honestly, and I've seen this happen a lot, the smarter that people are, the more miserable they actually become, because you have the ability to recognize and understand the problems that are happening all around you, but oftentimes you alone are not smart enough to find the solution. So you're just in this weird sort of purgatory where you understand everything around you that sucks, but you feel really helpless in trying to fix it because it's just beyond your level of comprehension. And I get it. Like, this is going to sound really prideful and braggy, and I don't mean for it to be that way, but like, I feel like I'm a smart person, but I also realize that I am not smart enough to fully understand the scope of every single thing that needs to happen in order to make like this entire country run. Like, I realize that there are certain problems, like, for example, maybe, some people think that there's an energy quote unquote crisis right now, or, whatever. And we're going to run out of natural gas. We're going to run out of coal, whatever. And so there's this whole push for electric vehicles and all of that. But like, you would think that the solution is just, hey, let's all switch to alternative forms of energy, wind or solar, or build a lot of batteries with lithium. But lithium's a natural resource that will eventually run out. And it's all those things. And there's just not a simple answer that fixes the entire problem. And it's really frustrating. And so that's why, for the most part, you have all of this infighting in Congress, and you have a lot of inaction because people just get paralyzed by their own sort of, sort of analysis where they just don't know what to do. And what I'm starting to see is that it's not necessarily Democrats versus Republicans, liberals versus conservatives in the sense of ideals. It's more about which side wants to take action more. And generally, the left is more about taking action than the right. The right, that's why they're called conservatives. They're more like, hey, let's just keep things as is. We don't know anything. And the left is like, well, hey, why don't we try this? Why don't we do this? Let's do. And so that's the real push and pull there. It's not that like Democrats want to rip apart the entire fabric of America and, turn our once Christian nation into a cesspool of sin and villainy. No, it's not that. It is. That's what dumber people see as the issue, because they hear what other dumb people are saying. But it's really just in how you look at it. Like, because I don't think Republicans necessarily hate trans people or gay people. They just don't understand the best way to fix this and make everyone happy, because they also they know that the dumb people in their base are going to get up in arms about it, even though it has no effect on their daily lives whatsoever. And so it's that lack of wanting to do something that is the issue that many people have with conservatives. It has nothing really to do with their base. That's just how it gets painted, because it's a simpler explanation and it's a juicier explanation. And then that gets into all the things about the media. Anyway, I'm going too long about this point. Let's go to number two. Number two, if you are super smart and you play in the high school marching band and math is your favorite subject, you're going to get bullied and people aren't going to like you. And that's exactly what happened to Ted Kaczynski. All right. Number three, it is highly probable that the U.S. government created the Unabomber, directly or indirectly, through Project MK Ultra. The study that Ted spent 200 hours in at Harvard. A lot of people think that was part of MK Ultra, as just figuring out ways to break someone down mentally, and it worked. Yeah. All right. Well, sorry about that rant there. I was getting so deep into it, and then a little voice in my head was like, "Hey, dude, you're doing a manifesto right now. you are turning into Ted Kaczynski. So I stopped, but my point still stands. Like, it's not, anyway, we're not getting back into it. Next week on Our Weird World, going back into serial killer land. I think that I like this kind of alternating between episodes about murderers and then just about other things. So next week, we are going to Germany. Going to be a lot of German accent, bad German accent, for this episode of some early German killers. We're going to look at two stories. Stories of Peter Neers and Christman Jinipertenga. I have to say that name with a fun little accent every time because it's such a weird name. Christman Jinipertenga. And so that's who we're talking about next week. Very, very early and very, very prolific serial killers. If these stories are in fact true, there's some doubt about that, but we will look at those stories nonetheless. So get ready for that next week. That's it. Thanks for listening. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird.